This is the Kitchen Sink WP Podcast, episode 638.
I program my home computer.
We have a server crash, 404 error, page not found, links aren't working, system is crashing, system is crashing, system is crashing.
Your old HTML website, barely alive. We have the technology. We have WordPress. A new website, better than it was before. Better, stronger, faster.
Hello, everybody. This is Adam Silva, host of the Kitchen Sink WP Podcast. Thanks for being here. Let's get started. All right, upcoming events. We have one next weekend, WordCamp Kampala. It is May 23rd and 24th. That's the only one there. The website looks nice and clean, and the reason I mention that is because I guess WordCamp US's website was lacking. Some people got on it, and I guess some new designs are coming. So, it looks like 2-day event, and if you're gonna be in that part of the world, you should definitely go. That's pretty cool. I won't be there, sorry. Okay, moving on to segment 1 in the news. 2 things here. WordPress 7.0 has a new release candidate, number 4, that's out, came out a few days ago, and it is still scheduled. 7.0 is scheduled to come out on May the 20th, which is 2 days after this episode drops. If all goes well, we will see that. And like I said last week, they have pulled out the real-time collaboration. RTC is no longer in 7.0 apparently, so check that out when it comes out on Tuesday. And also in the news, a new chapter for Relevanssi. I'm not trying to say it. Relevanssi. So apparently it was acquired. Ring the bell. New acquisition. Who picked them up? They are going to be joining forces with GmbH. They've joined forces with another company. And by the way, for those who don't know, that Relevanssi replaces the standard WordPress search for a better search engine with lots of features, configurable options. You get better results, etc. So there you go on that. That's it in the news. Yeah, that's it in the news. All right, moving on. The meat potatoes of this week's episode, segment 2. This week, I wanted something a little different because every week in WordPress, we hear about the standard stuff: SEO, maintenance plans, performance optimization, AI plugins, page builders, migrations, accessibility, the future of content, a lot of stuff on a weekly basis in different places, right? So, and that's all fine. But lately, I've been thinking more about the business around WordPress, the side roads, if you will, the weird little internet rabbit holes. And I was going to go way off the reservation, but I didn't want to go too far off. So the stuff that starts with WordPress, but eventually becomes something else entirely, because some of the most interesting opportunities right now are not necessarily build client website, send invoice, and repeat. And that is not super interesting, especially right now where we're at. And I've talked about this a little bit in the past here and there, but sometimes what's interesting is owning a digital property, building some new tiny tool, creating a community, and buying a domain at 11:30 p.m. because the brain says this is the one. So I, of course, have had some domain names over a decade with no plan whatsoever. Well, not necessarily anymore without the plan, but I still have some. Anyway, we'll get through that in a second here. So I have 3 sections. Section 1, just going to some internet observations from someone like myself who has too much time online, who spends a lot of time online. So section 1, domains, digital land, and these someday ideas. I think almost everyone in the WordPress community eventually becomes a domain collector. At first, you may buy one domain. You're responsible, you're disciplined, you're focused, and then suddenly you wake up one day and you own 37 domains. I'm not saying it's what I own. I mean, I've owned a lot more. I've owned close to less. You also have 4 unfinished projects. Checks out. And you have 2 future SaaS ideas. And a domain you bought at 1 a.m. because it felt like a good brand, a good idea at the time. So I know what you thought. Domains are fascinating because they're kind of like digital land. Some appreciate, most don't. Some become businesses, some become redirects, some become experiments, and some just sit there costing you $14.99 a year until the end of time. So as I've mentioned in the past, I often will have a new rule. If I buy a domain and I don't do anything with it within the first year, even get up a landing page, I let it expire. So it's kind of rare for me, but it does go. But I do think there's an interesting conversation around buying digital assets before you know what to do with them at that moment. So maybe you're going to use it for a hyper niche community, a local resource site, event websites, industry directory, tiny media brands, newsletters. a micro SaaS tool. A lot of those start with, this domain is available. And then maybe 6 months later, the idea appears, or maybe it never does. And honestly, one of the hardest parts is knowing when to let the domain go, because emotionally, you're attached to the idea of what could become, not what actually is. I have domains where every year I see the renewal license and think, okay, this might just be the year. Spoiler, it usually isn't, but occasionally one becomes something real. And I think that's why people keep going and doing that. Like I said, including myself, I have bought, I think, 2 or 3 this year so far. And I've also let 2 or 3 expire. So it's a net negative, not net even, it's net the same, I guess. That's what I'm trying to say. But keep that in mind. Have yourself a guideline is what I recommend here. So there you go with that. Okay, section 2, tiny tools instead of giant agencies. Now, this one's become really interesting lately, in my opinion, because with AI tools, vibe coding, Lovable, Codex, ChatGPT, pick your poison here, the barrier to building small software ideas is much lower than it ever has been before. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying everyone suddenly becomes a SaaS founder overnight, but I am saying the gap between idea and working prototype has collapsed. And I think a lot of WordPress people are uniquely positioned for this. The reason for that is we understand workflows, client pain points, forms, automation, content systems, memberships, onboarding, and even user confusion. We've spent years watching where people struggle. That means we can really build tiny solutions, not giant platforms, but really specific, slow, and methodical, figured out tiny solutions. The examples for that might be a proposal calculator, check. RFP analyzer, check. Onboarding systems, niche directories, client dashboards, quote generators, checklists, content workflows, resume builders. Wow, I didn't realize how many of those I've actually done. Anyway, honestly, sometimes a tiny, ugly tool that solves one problem is more valuable than some giant polished platform that tries to solve everything. And maybe it makes $50 a month, maybe it makes $500 a month, or maybe it just generates leads. Either way, it's very interesting because now instead of selling only one time, you're building assets, small ones maybe, but assets nonetheless. And WordPress people are actually really good at this, even if you, myself, don't realize it just yet. Okay, section 3, the final one here, it may be my favorite, community as a business. This one might be the most underrated of all because community used to just mean start a Facebook group. But nowadays, in my opinion, people are exhausted. The algorithm, the noise, the engagement bait, platforms changing constantly. And I think there's a growing desire for smaller, more intentional, more focused communities, forums, membership, private groups, niche spaces. And again, WordPress has always been oddly good at enabling this stuff because we, again, understand user roles, memberships, forums, content restriction, events, newsletters, moderation. We have the toolkit already. What's interesting here is sometimes the community itself becomes the product, not the website, not the plugin, the people. That communication can lead to referrals, partnerships, sponsors, content ideas, friendships, hiring opportunities, business opportunities. And sometimes simply gathering the right people together consistently becomes the value. And honestly, I think a lot of people underestimate how powerful a niche community can be. You don't need millions of users. You just don't. Sometimes you just need 500 really engaged people who care about the same thing. That can become incredibly valuable. And again, it's one of my favorite things, and I've been working on for so long, trying to crack the nut here in a couple of different areas, the running space, travel, and I'm so close. I know I am, and I have the domains to prove it. Anyway, so I do think there's something fascinating about these adjacent little entrepreneurial experiments, especially now. Maybe I think more people are realizing that the future isn't one giant business. Maybe it's a combination of things, a podcast, a small tool, a niche website, consulting, side experiments, a weird little internet property, a portfolio of small bets. Yeah, I'm going to call it that way. I'm going to go with that. The small bets portfolio. And honestly, that feels a lot more interesting to me these days than just the one big site that you build, hand off, and, have to replace with, another client potentially. So that's this week's random little brain jump I wanted to share with you. Not necessarily predictions, not financial advice, definitely not tax advice, just observations from someone who has spent way too many years inside of WordPress and the internet business world. And I think some of the most interesting opportunities now are just outside of the obvious path for many of us. Not necessarily replacing client work, but complementing it, creating optionality, creating ownership, creating weird little experiments that eventually become something bigger, or at a minimum, another domain renewal next year when you get that notice. Okay, so, and I think that's kind of the fun of it as well. There you go. That's my kind of short-winded take on some things that are tangentially related to the WordPress business or the business of WordPress. All right, so moving on now, segment 3, tip and tool of the week. This week, it's a plugin called ProfileSwitch Lite by David Parker. Saw this, I believe, over in the Post Status Slack group. It turns a single WordPress login into multiple profiles. Use cases are families, youth programs, online courses, business accounts. Pretty cool. There's a free level and a paid level. It looks really neat, so check it out. I have no connection to it from an affiliate perspective. Just know David from online and the ether, and there you go. Check it out. So I think the domain, in this case, it's actually in the WordPress.org repo. I will put a link to it, of course, in the show notes. So there you go. All right. That is it for this week. If you have any questions, go ahead and send it in via email, adam@KitchensinkWP.com, or use the speak pipe function on the website. If you want to support the show, that'd be awesome. Become a Patreon or buy me a cup of coffee. If you want to sponsor the show, you can do that too. There's a form to fill out. I'll get right back to you. Thanks for listening. See you next week. Now go out and do some awesome things with WordPress. All right? Bye-bye.